Welcome. In this technical explainer, we're going to dig into paper 43. It tackles a key numerical mystery that popped up in some prior research on twisted Burr map operators. See, papers 41 and 42 found this really weird phenomenon, a key measurement that just kept, well, saturating. And this analysis is all about figuring out exactly why that was happening.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll outline the mystery itself. Then, we'll look at the method they used to investigate it, a spatial decomposition. After that, we'll get to the heart of it, the one-hot vector finding, and what that really means for the older results. We'll also be very clear about the boundaries and limitations here, and then we'll look ahead to the big test that's being set up for paper 44.
So let's start with the puzzle that came out of papers 41 and 42. There's this important diagnostic, the global oscillation functional, and it was consistently hitting its maximum possible value on the boundary subgrid. It was just stuck there, and nobody really knew why.
Yeah, so both of these earlier papers reported that for all three of the kernels they were studying, the global oscillation, osc of phi epsilon, was just uniformly 1.0 on this boundary subgrid, EBYD. But here's the thing, they never figured out the spatial distribution. I mean, where is the supposed roughness actually living on the grid?
And that leads to the big question, right? Does this maxed out oscillation value mean the function is genuinely rough and jagged everywhere? Or could it just be a numerical illusion? You know, something caused by all of the variation getting crammed into just a tiny little corner of the grid. And that is what paper 43 sets out to answer. So to really get to the bottom of this, paper 43 uses a pretty clever technique. It's a spatial decomposition of the invariant-density proxy, and it's all done on that fixed n equals 1024 Ulam grid. The approach itself is actually quite simple and elegant. They just take that 1024 cell partition and split it into 3 separate non-overlapping windows. This lets them measure the oscillation all by itself in the left quarter, then in the big central half, and then finally in the right quarter. Now for the analysis, they use a frozen Python script. It's called paper43_cellwise_osc_probe.py. And what it does is it leverages all that certified numerical infrastructure from paper 42, but instead of just spitting out one global number, it computes these 7 very specific spatial statistics for every single one of the 30 test cases. And the results that came out of this probe, well, they're absolutely unambiguous. And they're incredibly consistent across all 30 tests. That's 3 different kernels, each evaluated at 10 different epsilon values. So the first key finding is, well, it's pretty stunning. For every single one of those 30 test cases, the oscillation in the left quarter and the right quarter of the grid is precisely 0. All the variation has just completely vanished from the outer parts of the domain. And this just paints the complete picture for us. You can see it right here. All of that global oscillation we were seeing, that saturated value of 1.0, is contained entirely within the central half of the partition. So, mystery solved. The roughness isn't spread out everywhere, it's totally concentrated right in the middle.
But wait, the analysis goes even deeper. The script also calculated the Cellwise variance of the density proxy, sigma2_cell. And what do you know? Across all 30 computations, this variance converges to a very specific number, about 9.756 times 10 to the minus 4. Now, this number isn't random. It is the crucial clue. So why this number? Well, it's no coincidence. It's actually structurally identical to the variance of something called a one-hot vector. That's just a vector where one entry is 1 and every other entry is 0. And if you calculate the variance for that kind of vector, where n equals 1024, you get this exact number. The match is so incredibly precise that it gives us overwhelming numerical evidence for what's happening. The invariant density proxy has collapsed into a spike in a single cell.
This finding is so definitive, it forces us to go back and completely reinterpret that whole saturation thing that was first reported back in papers 41 and 42. This just changes the game entirely. That saturation to OSC equals 1.0, it wasn't a signal of genuine, widespread roughness at all. It was a discretization artifact. Because the numerical method was converging to a state where one cell was hot, it had a value of 1, and all the others were cold with a value of 0, the oscillation functional was literally just measuring the difference between 1 and 0.
Now, it's really important to say that this doesn't just throw out all the previous work. The diameter proxy from paper 42, that d of h, epsilon, is still a useful relative diagnostic because it does vary meaningfully. But what this finding makes crystal clear is that any future work on oscillation bounds has to be tested on a properly BV normalized density, not just the raw output from the power iteration.
Okay, so to maintain that referee-level precision we're aiming for, we also have to talk about some secondary findings, and just as importantly, the explicit limitations of this analysis.
The probe also picked up on a weak but totally reproducible signal related to the kernel's tail weight. The actual location of that peak cell, the one carrying all the mass, it drifts around a little bit. And at every single point they sampled, the ordering was consistent. The peak for the alien kernel was furthest to the right, then the WI, and the Lorentzian peak was always significantly further left.
And let's be absolutely clear about what this paper does not claim. These are purely numerical findings on the n equals 24 grid. It's not making any grand analytic statements about the true continuous invariant density. It doesn't prove the density is singular. It simply observes that on this specific grid, the numerical proxy converges to a single cell spike. So the paper wraps up by proposing a really clean, definitive follow-up test. The goal is to figure out if this single cell concentration is a persistent numerical artifact or if it's hinting at something deeper. This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And paper 44 is going to tackle it head-on by rerunning the exact same frozen probe script, but this time at double the resolution on an n equals 2048 grid. The result from this one test should tell us a whole lot. And this sets up a beautiful experiment with two clear, falsifiable outcomes. Possibility 1. The Cellwise variance just neatly shifts to the new one-hot value for n equals 2048. If that happens, then case closed. It's a single spike artifact that just scales with the grid size. But if the variance does not scale like that, well, then things get really exciting. That would suggest the mass is finally starting to spread out over multiple cells, that we're seeing the beginning of some genuine small-scale structure. And that leaves us with a really fascinating cliffhanger for the next stage of this work,